the ābhāsa means semblance. It looks like Shringara, but it is not Shringara.
Okay.
So the ābhāsa of Shringara creates Haasya. So the difference is on the theatre, you are not actually reacting to the Vibhava directly. You have a Vibhava, and then you have somebody called Ashraya. Even when you are reconstructing the meaning of horror,
Yeah.
Bhayanaka or Bibhatsa,
It's enjoyable.
it's a meaning, so it's enjoyable.
Yeah.
It still has the disgust side a little bit to it, but so this is very important. Rasa and the bhava, the distinction. At the same time, if you say that humor is tied up with a sense of proportion,
Yeah.
it will also be true because a fanatic is only one-sided.
Yeah.
Fanatic, his mind is going on one track. So if you make a joke, you make him see things from the opposite angle.
Namaste. I am Prachand Praveer. I'll be talking to Dr. Sunthar Visuvalingam today. Dr. Sunthar Visuvalingam's 1984 PhD on Abhinavagupta's conception of humor and resonance in Sanskrit drama, poetry, Hindu mythology, and spiritual forces was strongly recommended for D.Litt degree. An independent researcher based in Chicago, his subsequent publication developed his interdisciplinary insights in multiple directions, including comparative religion, aesthetics, and anthropology. Namaste, sir.
Namaste. Thank you very much.
We are very happy to host you here for Sangam Talks. So first question is, how did you become interested in Indian intellectual tradition?
Well, as you said, I am based in Chicago, but I am actually originally I was born in Kuala Lumpur, brought up in Kuala Lumpur, did my schooling in Kuala Lumpur, which is the capital of Malaysia. So I was actually in the science stream, studying the sciences, right up to advanced levels, Cambridge advanced levels, it's called A levels. And so that was how things were going. And I was heading for, eventually I was wanting to do a degree in psychology, do my research in psychology in the UK, etc. But during the last 3-4 years of my stay in Malaysia, I started learning a lot about Advaita Vedanta, etc. There lecturers and preachers used to come from India, and I used to listen to them, and I became very curious. I was also undergoing a kind of spiritual crisis, young teenage spiritual crisis at that time, thinking about life and so many things, what's the purpose of life, etc. So I became very influenced, and I became more and more attracted to Advaita Vedanta. I only knew about, I discovered Swami Vivekananda's writings, and Shankaracharya. For me at that time, I thought that Advaita Vedanta was the highest Indian philosophy. So I decided I needed to, it was a very sudden decision, with my family a bit unhappy also, to go to India and study Advaita Vedanta. And so I thought if I want to study Indian texts, if I want to study this, I didn't know Sanskrit, all mine is second-hand reading through English. So I said, let me go to India, Benares. I said, let me go to Benares and study Sanskrit and study the original texts, Upanishads and, commentaries and all of that. So that was the idea with which I came. And I also became very interested in Indian culture and it's my tradition. But I came from a very westernized background. So basically I'm learning from practically zero, even about my own heritage. So in 1972, I quit everything, came to Benares, joined BHU from scratch. So, people told me in Malaysia, why don't you do your BA here, MA here, then go and do your PhD in India? I said, no, what for waste time? Let me go directly. So I went to, I did my BA with Indian philosophy, Sanskrit, etc. Then my master's in Sanskrit literature, because I thought that the best way to master Sanskrit would be by studying Sanskrit literature, because that's the most difficult Sanskrit, like Bhattakavya, all of that. So, and then for my PhD, I, also in the same track, I started to do a PhD in Sanskrit and philosophy at the Banaras Hindu University Philosophy Department. So this is how it's my life itinerary.
That's very interesting.
And what
sir.
you're seeing now is the result of those critical decisions.
That's very interesting, sir. But I'm just curious that right from the hardcore, typically the notion of philosophy is something very dry and something very spiritual, transcendental. But what drew you to rasa aesthetics and that to Abhinavagupta in particular?
Very good question. You see, I told you I was going through a spiritual crisis.
Yeah.
So I became very interested in Advaita Vedanta. So whether it is Advaita Vedanta or Sankhya or Yoga,
Yeah.
what is the biggest obstacle in the spiritual path? Your emotions, raga, right?
Yeah.
Raga and bhava. So these are the things which are clinging to the world. You love people, you hate people. So for me at that time, so I understood, and that's what everybody understood. You see, you need to overcome your emotions. So emotions are the obstacle. So you need viveka. That's from Vivekananda, viveka. So you need to discriminate and away from your emotions. So that was actually a little bit going against my own nature. Not only reject the emotions, reject the world. See. And me, by nature, you see, different people have different temperaments, and you need to find a path which is suited to your temperament. So my temperament is basically I'm very attracted to beauty since young, So here I am now. So I have my natural temperament taking, I enjoy music, I enjoy arts, etc. And here I am being taught, whether it is by Buddhism. I was also exposed to Buddhism quite early in Malaysia. So whether it is Buddhism or Hinduism, this kind of renunciatory path, the emotions are the obstacle. So I actually started to struggle against my own nature, my own emotions. So even after I came to India, this was a problem, spiritual struggle, sort of struggling with my own personality and my nature. Then suddenly, at that time, I didn't know anything about Abhinavagupta. As you mentioned right at the start, my doctorate is in Abhinavagupta's conception of humor.
Yeah.
So it's quite the opposite of this whole itinerary, spiritual itinerary, which I am I've been describing till now. So it's only about 1977, 78 that I discovered Abhinavagupta completely by accident.
Okay.
So what happened was I was in Pune, and by chance I heard a lecture by well-known mystic there. Just by chance, people said, "Go and listen to him. You are here." So I went, and it so happened the first time I'm listening to him. He's a very impressive speaker, and the whole topic was the relationship between the mystical experience and the aesthetic experience. So here I am, thinking that the mystical experience, spiritual experience means rejecting the senses. Aesthetics has to do with the senses, right? So I thought, and then here he is talking about how the mystical experience and the aesthetic experience are very related. And actually this whole talk was based on the excerpts from the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra,
Okay.
which is a central text of Kashmiri Shaivism. So at that time I didn't know anything. So I was very intrigued. So I thought, man, this is something he's speaking to me, because I'm right in the middle of this struggle, and here he's saying that these two things are complementary, not opposed, etc. So he didn't really much talk about Abhinavagupta, but he talked about Kashmiri Shaivism. And so I became very thrilled. And so when I came back to Benares, mind was just on this. I started studying the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra. Then I heard about Abhinavagupta and all. So I became very interested I discovered his rasa aesthetics. And that also is very important. The very first book on Abhinavagupta, which is a very famous book, which I discovered, was called Abhinavagupta and Hāsya-rasa. So this is a book by a Harvard professor who is working on Indian. He's a psychoanalyst and Harvard professor called Jeffrey Mason. And he wrote this big book on Hāsya-rasa, Abhinavagupta on Hāsya-rasa, which is the commentary on the Nāṭya Śāstra by Abhinavagupta. This is interesting because, I'm coming from this background of renunciation and rejection of the senses. So when Abhinavagupta talks about Hāsya-rasa, he's still talking about this renunciatory path. That Hāsya-rasa is the supreme rasa because you are rejecting all the other the other emotions, the worldly emotions, and Shanta-rasa is related to moksha. That is his whole argument. So I'm still a little bit in the Advaita path. That is how I discovered Abhinavagupta. But Abhinavagupta is not just about Shanta-rasa. He's talking about all the rasas. And he's talking about how you can enjoy theatre, enjoy music, enjoy poetry. And there is Shanta-rasa in all the rasas. So that is his thing. But at the same time, you're enjoying, but what you're enjoying is rasa. It is not the bhava. It is not the kind of attachment kind of emotions. It is the emotion without the enjoyment. So because in real life, there is fear, bhaya, anger, krodha, depression, sorrow, shoka. These are all very painful emotions. But in theatre, all these become enjoyable. Or in cinema, they're enjoyable. We go and see horror movies. Why is that? in real life, we will avoid all these serial killers and all of that, right? So this is the first time I'm hearing of this distinction. In Western psychology, which I've also been studying, I never come across this distinction. There's a big difficulty in distinguishing between emotions and aesthetic emotions, between, bhava and rasa. So this is what drew me. So the reason was not just academic, it was personal. In fact, it was personal, but it became academic for me. From Shanta-rasa, I started studying all the rasas. Then I said, let me do my PhD on Abhinavagupta's theory of rasa. So basically, it was the primary focus would have been chapter 6, Adhyaya 6 of his Abhinava Bharati commentary on the Nāṭya Śāstra, because he talks about all the rasas there. So that was what my original plan was when I started my PhD in around 1977.
That's very nice. And typically one starts with chapter 6 and chapter 7 for understanding Rasa and
Bhava.
goes on to the... But regarding Shanta-rasa, Anandavardhan, I think he was the first one who mentioned in Dvanya Lok that Shanta-rasa is chief rasa or Angirasa for Mahabharata. So, but coming back to your research into Haasya, I'm just curious because in Western tradition, humor is often scorned, like in Plato and Aristotle, they'll say authority shouldn't be laughed and laughter should be banned. And here we have the hāsya-rasa, which is typically one of the 8 major rasa. And many times it is considered most trivial. So, what drew you to look after the most trivial rasa, hāsya-rasa?
Very good question. Thank you. Two things. You see, I told you what attracted me to this rasa and all of that, after all this thing about renunciation and moksha and all of that, to rasa theory, because that was my temperament. So another thing is I have a very humorous temperament. I have a part of my personality, I have a humorous temperament. People always tell me, oh, you're always smiling. I don't even realize I'm smiling, but my face is almost... people all over the world, they tell me, oh, and I don't know I'm smiling. So that's my nature also, So that's one thing, smiling. Not laughing. Laughing also, but mostly smiling. There's a big difference in Sanskrit, in Indian aesthetic between smiling and laughing. Okay? Anyway, so, but at the same time, laughter everywhere, not just in India, is considered... People who laugh a lot are considered base characters.
Yes.
Abhinavagupta himself says this. Only women and children, they laugh at everything, they start laughing. You see? Yeah. Whereas noble characters, Uttama Purusha, Rama, and maybe smile. Look at the Buddha. Is there any picture of... Did you see any statue of the Buddha laughing? Not in India. In China, yes. You see, the best thing the Buddha does is like a smile. And the smile also is very introverted smile. He's not trying to make people laugh, right? Yeah. So this is true generally of Indian aesthetics. So it's a very trivial emotion. And if you look at the rasas, there are 8 rasas. I mean, with Shanta there is 9. So the rasas are divided into 2 sets. There's one set, 4 rasas which are pradhana, principal rasas, and Haasya, and then there are 4 secondary rasas.
Yes.
Haasya or humor is a secondary rasa.
Yes.
So and this is true not just of civilized, refined cultures like Indian classical culture or Western, culture or whatever. Even in the Amazon, in the tribes of Amazon, the warrior, who are the warriors or the example. So Levi-Strauss shows in the myths, the warrior doesn't laugh, doesn't smile. It's very serious. It's only women and children who laugh. It's considered bad behavior, uncontrolled behavior, lack of restraint. See? So this is what it was. And I was going to deal with humor because, I myself am sort of very intrigued about humor and laughter. It was going to be just one rasa in that thesis. But then when I was reading Abhinavagupta, I came across the most bizarre things that anybody has said about humor and laughter.
So what does Abhinavagupta has to say about humor and laughter?
Very good.
Yeah.
So when I was reading, and you see, most people have just noticed it, they give, they try to make sense of it and then they just leave it and go aside. But I came across four statements that Abhinavagupta makes about hāsya-rasa. The first thing he says is, you see, in the Nāṭya Śāstra, Bharata says there are certain relationships between the different rasas.
Yes.
Internal relationships. And in the theatre, in the drama, you can make use of these relationships. So I won't go into the relationships of all the rasas. So just to focus on Haasya, Bharata says there is a special relationship between love or eros, Sringara, and Haasya. Yeah? So he says Haasya rises from Sringara.
Yes.
Close relation. And you will see that in the theatre, whenever there is love situation, there is a lot of humor, playing tricks and jokes and, playfulness. Krishna and Radha and all. It's very funny also, right? Similarly, you see all these Natikas, the smaller plays. It's all love situations, Vasavadatta, all these stories. Swapna Vasavadatta, other stories. It's all the king and his love affairs, and there's the Vidūṣaka, who's a clown. So it's all, the humorous setting. So Bharata says, Haasya is created or generated in the context of Sringara. So Abhinavagupta, you see, Bharata is a player, is dealing with the operational, performative aspects of theatre. But Abhinavagupta is a philosopher. The psychologist is a philosopher. And at the same time, he's very interested in performance. But he is coming with a perspective which Bharata does not have. But he's coming with a very constructive perspective on Bharata. At that time, many people were trying to destroy Nāṭya Śāstra because it was no longer properly understood. Like even Bhoja, Sringara Prakasha, around almost contemporary of Abhinavagupta, attacks the Nāṭya Śāstra. It doesn't make sense, this doesn't make sense, this is contradictory.
Yes.
So Abhinava's project is completely different. He wants to establish the Nāṭya Śāstra, trying to show it is coherent. So he says, this is very interesting. You see how he expands. He takes statements of Bharata, he expands it and gives it a philosophical, psychological basis. So when Bharata says that all the rasas, when he says that from Sringara, from certain way of representing Sringara, you get Haasya. Abhinavagupta says the ābhāsa means semblance. It looks like Sringara, but it is not Sringara.
Okay.
So the ābhāsa of Sringara creates Haasya. And the example he gives, both in the Dvanyaloka Lochana and in the Abhinava Bharati, is of Ravana. See, Ravana, he's expressing his love to Sita. He wants Sita to marry him and all this, expressing. So he's expressing the love to Sita in just the same way that maybe Rama would express his love for Sita. But in the case of Rama and Sita, it is mutual, reciprocal. When you see them, Rama is courting Sita and Sita is also responding, etc. And there is a kind of compatibility between them. If you look at the context, there's a compatibility in age, situation. But you see Ravana and Sita, there's complete incongruity, incompatibility. So when Ravana is expressing, he's lamenting his love for Sita, he's beating his chest and crying. So if we laugh, in Rama and Sita, is love situation, we experience Sringara. Or with Krishna and Radha also, we experience Sringara. With Ravana and Sita, it's one-sided, difference of age, circumstance. So it is Haasya. So what Abhinavagupta is saying is that, and this he develops at some length, that when we see Ravana and Sita, Ravana courting Sita, it looks like Sringara. It looks like Sringara. We seem to be also a little bit experiencing some of the things of Sringara, but it is a semblance. It's a ābhāsa. It's not real Sringara. So the Sringara starts to rise because, we see all these actions and gestures and vibhava, anubhava and all of that. But there is rasabhanga because of this incompatibility, because of this incongruity. And so we start, instead there is Haasya. But here is where Abhinavagupta makes a very important psychological and philosophical contribution. He says not just Sringara, any rasa. You have 9 rasas.
Yeah.
So you have Sringara bhasa, Bhaya bhasa, Vibhatsa bhasa, Shanta bhasa, anything, any ābhāsa of any rasa, semblance of any rasa will result in Haasya. And he says, therefore, in theatre, you can represent the ābhāsa of any rasa and it will promote, the result will be Haasya, the audience will be enjoying Haasya. So he has generalized. So this is the first thing. First point that he makes is the semblance of any rasa becomes Haasya. This is the first statement he makes. And he explains this to some extent. So it's not that difficult to understand. So this is one. So this is the first point he makes, first observation.
Yes.
Acceptable.
Yes.
Okay. Even if you agree or don't agree, it's acceptable. You can see the reasoning and all of that. The second thing is, he says, is that, and this is what people have scratched their head, including this Jeffrey Mason, whom I mentioned, hāsya-rasa, the book, and Abhinavagupta's Aesthetics. So he says, because the ābhāsa or the semblance of any rasa becomes Haasya, therefore all the rasas are included in Haasya. How is it possible? Say, for example, he says that there is Shanta in all the rasas. There is no Shanta in all the Bhavas. In emotions, when you're experiencing all the emotions, there is no Shanta. That's opposite. But in theatre, in the rasa, there is Shanta because beneath the rasa, there is always Shanta. There is element of Shanta rasa, in fact, in all the rasas, and you can enjoy Shanta rasa by itself, like Buddha or somebody depicted in theatre. But to say that all the rasas are included in Haasya, this is problematic, right? Because you have 8, 9 emotions, they're all emotions. Haasya is there, and as we just discussed, it's a trivial emotion, and it's even criticized. And he says this Haasya contains all the rasas. So what kind of psychology of the emotions, what is that insight into humor and laughter that allows him to say that? And he does not develop this idea. And we can see later on towards the end of this interview why this has been the case. So he says this. So this is the second point. All the rasas are included in Haasya. So now, you see, Abhinavagupta is also a very logical, systematic thinker. So we have 9 rasas. And the semblance of any rasa becomes Haasya. So what about Haasya? Haasya itself is a rasa. So if the semblance of any rasa becomes Haasya, what about the semblance of Haasya? It's a logical question, no? So he says, now this is very self-contradictory. He says, therefore, the third thing he says, which is very paradoxical, the semblance of Haasya is also Haasya. So now you see, we started off with Ravana and Sringara. So he says the semblance of Sringara, the semblance of love becomes Haasya. That means it is not love, it is not Sringara. That is why it becomes Haasya. Otherwise it would be Sringara. But in the case of Haasya, the semblance of Haasya becomes Haasya. So this is completely self-contradictory, right? You just look at it logically. Something is funny or it is not funny. Right? Either it is funny or it's not funny. It is comic or not comic. But here he's saying it is funny, but it is also just a semblance of being funny. So this is a very confusing, it doesn't make full sense at all. And this he doesn't explain. It seems logical, but actually is.
Okay.
This is the third thing he says. And the fourth thing he says, and this is also very problematic because you're talking about theatre. He says, therefore, the Vidūṣaka deploys or expresses or deploys in the theatre, on the stage, it deploys the semblance of Haasya. Why is this paradoxical? Because we all understand the Vidūṣaka to be a clown. He is there only for hāsya-rasa. He is only there to make people laugh. That is what traditionally everybody has understood the role of the Vidūṣaka in Sanskrit theatre. So if you say that the Vidūṣaka is just deploying the semblance of humor, so should we laugh or not? So, not everybody laughs at the Vidūṣaka. But if it is a semblance, then maybe we should not laugh. Right? So, this raises a problem as what is his understanding of the Vidūṣaka. So, let me just recapitulate the four things he says because I've been discussing. So, number one, he says the semblance of any rasa, of any aesthetic emotions becomes Haasya. Two, therefore, all the rasas are included in Haasya or in humor. Three, the semblance of humor, the semblance of Haasya is also Haasya. Semblance of humor is also humor. And fourth, he says the Vidūṣaka or the clown deploys the semblance of humor. So these are the four strings. So by this time, by this time, I had great respect for Abhinavagupta. By this time, I completely forgotten about Shankara.
Okay.
I came to India to study Shankara.
Yeah.
And I've come back to Shankara more recently. But then, at that time, so I completely lost in Abhinavagupta. Because Abhinavagupta is not just theatre and aesthetics, it's also tantra, philosophy.
Yeah.
So he's a huge gold mine, like a diamond mine. So for me, that time I was not doing anything but reading Abhinavagupta, trying to make sense of him, how do all these different things fit together and all of that. So if somebody else had said this, four things, I would say, okay, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not even talking sense, I would have said. But because it is Abhinavagupta, and in this chapter itself, Rasadhyaya, there is so much of wonderful and so deeply insightful thing. So I said, there must be something in it. So I started asking so many professors, people, none of them, Sanskrit Pandits, Western scholars, and none of them could, everybody was scratching their heads. So I said to myself, okay, so I have to understand this. So my thesis at that time, I started with all the rasas. I already started working on some of the rasas, especially Sringara. I started. So by this time, I realized this is a very big topic. I'm going to have to do a lot of research. So let me do my thesis on just Haasya. So my task, my challenge will be in my PhD thesis to take these four things that Abhinavagupta says and try to make out what is the coherence. Is there some coherent theory of humor and laughter in it? So that became the entire thesis, Abhinavagupta's conception of humor.
See, in Rasa theory, we know that while we are witnessing or seeing a play or drama or performative art or say even in movies,
Yes,
my
exactly.
book is an Abhinav Cinema,
Yeah, exactly.
is about movies, that there are certain cases of determinants called vibhav and there's certain consequence called anubhav and there's something called Vyavichari bhava or translatory emotions and they transitory emotion, they all come together and together the rasa manifest. This is the standard rasa sutra,
Yes.
which doesn't explain about rasa. It's only we have got the four famous explanation by Lollat and Shankuk and Bhattanayak and Abhinavagupta, and these all mentioned only in Abhinava Bharati. We witness those first three position of Lollat and how what is the shortcoming by and then or critic by Shankuk Shankuk, and then Shankuk's critique by Bhattanayak, and then Bhattanayak critique by Bhattatot, and Abhinavagupta's Abhinavagupta, this all come, and they talk about Rasas. I see the problem, that intellectual problem that becomes with laughter is for the entire Western thinking, they started with the scorning laughter, or making it trivial or not so useful, and then you have a problematic notion, like you will put satire, irony, wit, parody, everything all into humor, and then somebody like, no, humor is different and laughter is different. Famously, like Freud will have a different idea of humor, and say for Kant it goes into nothing, and then so many things come into it.
Yes, they all define, you see, the definitions themselves are different.
Yes,
the way Freud defines the words
Yeah.
like humor, comic
Yeah.
is different from how other thinkers.
Yes.
So there's a big problem about just definition,
Yeah.
the use of words.
Yes.
So if you want to even start talking, there's a lot of confusion.
No, I don't want
people
to.
are using the same words and talking about different things.
Yeah, no, I don't want to diverge myself into all the Western thinkings. I just want to put this into right perspective, that look, we're not talking about laughter and humor in general. First, maybe we'll do a little later, but first we are focusing only on a rasa part of a Haasya. So, could you just elaborate more on the first point you mentioned? That any rasa, semblance of rasa is become Haasya. To some extent, it becomes understandable. You can understand it easily. But for like vibhas and the semblance of vibhas, or maybe a semblance of karuna, and then this all, it becomes a little problematic. Could you just throw more light on it? Would like to throw?
Yes, actually, you started with the question. I think maybe we should little bit backtrack from humor.
Yes.
And talk about rasa first.
Yes.
Before we talk about humor and laughter, let's talk about just rasa and
Yes.
the difference between bhāva.
Yes.
Because you started off by pointing out vibhava, anubhava, vyabhichari bhāva, and then
Yes.
you see there is a big difference between rasa and bhāva.
Yeah.
And this is actually not well understood in Western, because I read a lot, I.A. Richards,
Yeah.
he was also trying to understand, he came up with this word synesthesis and etc. Anyway, I won't go into that. Okay, you see, when I started work on my thesis, there are two things I could have done. I could have taken statements of Abhinavagupta, he says many things about him, and then immediately started comparing it with some Western thinker, because there are a lot of parallels.
Yes.
You will say there's parallels with Freud, with Bergson, Kessler,
Yeah.
and all of that. So I could have done that. But the thing is, my sort of procedural principle was, first of all, I have to understand Abhinavagupta's statements in a coherent way.
Yes.
That means, because if I immediately start making connections between one thing here and one thing there and one thing that, it becomes very confusing.
Yes.
Because the West has its own problematic, and they are not discussing with Abhinavagupta. They are discussing and building upon each other.
Yes.
So they are having one discourse there.
Yes.
And here in India, there's another discourse.
Yes.
So Abhinavagupta's discourse, as you mentioned, Shankuka,
Yeah. Lolata.
Bhattanayaka, and Lolata, and all of that. So there's one more discourse. So my thing is that I should first of all try to reconstruct the coherence of the Indian discourse.
Yes.
So this is it. So I actually kept the comparisons to later. So even when I make the comparisons in my PhD thesis, I actually do it after I have already figured out to a large extent what is Abhinavagupta's way of thinking about this. So I think it's very important to understand this relationship between rasa and bhava, because a lot of even people like Sheldon Pollock,
Yes.
he has criticized Abhinavagupta. So one of his criticisms is that, and I have a YouTube talk just on this topic, what is the difference between rasa and bhava, because even people who are specialists and authorities on this, I think have not got it. So he says, in the West they have reader response. So the idea is when you see a cinema, for example, you have worked on cinema,
Yes.
you're watching the cinema and you are responding with emotions to the cinema, like the theatre. So it's like reader response or audience response.
Yes.
So how can, so this is in the audience, so how can that be used to, different people may respond differently, reader response. So how can that be used to analyze or appreciate the work of art?
Yeah.
There are two different things. So this is the point. But actually, there is a big difference, and the difference is this: that you see, in real life, there is cause, effect, and concomitatory. That is see, there's vyabhichari bhav. Vibhav is cause. In real life, it is karana.
Yeah, yeah.
So somebody makes you angry.
Yeah.
Somebody shouts at you, he abuses you, he makes you angry.
Yeah, yeah.
Somebody frightens you, and you are afraid. So there is a karana, cause,
Yeah.
psychological cause or
Yeah.
physical cause,
Yeah.
which is creating an emotion. So you are reacting. You are psychologically you are reacting. But what happens on the stage, on the theatre, in the stage or in the cinema,
Yeah.
it is something very different.
Yeah.
That is why it is called vibhava. It is not called karana. They have come
Yes.
up with a technical vocabulary to make this distinction. So the difference is on the theatre, you are not actually reacting to the vibhava directly. You have a vibhava, and then you have somebody called ashraya.
Yeah.
So for example, Sita is a vibhava.
Yeah.
Rama is looking at Sita. Immediately as soon as the first time he sees her, he's struck by her beauty and, you know. So he is an ashraya.
Yeah.
So he is the one who is seeming to feel the emotion. I say seeming. Seemingly he is the one who is feeling the emotion of love.
Yeah.
Right? And then you see Rama acting in a certain way. There is the effects, karya.
Yeah.
You know, he's showing his love, the way he looks at her, his gestures, his approaches her or whatever, all of that. So there is effects. But it is not the same as here in real life. You are showing the effects of fear or anger. No, it's on the stage.
Yeah.
So Sita, Vibhava, she is producing certain effects in the ashraya, which is Rama. And you are watching this. You are not directly involved.
Yes.
So this is very important. It's completely different from the situation in real life. That is why the rasa is close to consciousness. The way the rasa arises is very different from the way the same emotion arrives in real life. It's the same emotion, but it is not the same emotion.
It doesn't have the capacity.
It doesn't have that same heaviness in real life, that thing. So what happens is, the way you enjoy this emotion in theatre or in cinema is through a process called tanmayi bhavana.
Yeah.
Identification, or rather aesthetic identification. It's called tanmayi bhavana. And Abhinavagupta talks a lot about this. So, this may seem like a digression, but it's important to set the stage.
Yes. Yeah.
So in the theatre, all the people, the whole audience is having tanmayi bhavana with Rama.
Yeah.
So we are enjoying Sita, we are enjoying the love of Sita, Shringara with Sita as a vibhava, through Rama. You see? Because otherwise, and this is actually, Bhattanayaka raises this, if we have Shringara for us, it's very anuchit.
Yeah.
You see, we have become like Ravana. So actually, we are not saying, I am in love with Sita, you know.
Yeah.
We are enjoying, through Rama,
Yeah.
the love for Sita.
Yeah.
So what we are enjoying is just Shringara, you know, it's very impersonal form of Shringara.
Yeah.
So there is Sadharanikaran. So all of us,
Yeah.
in the hall, in the theatre or whatever, all of us are enjoying the same emotion, Sadharanikaran, generalization.
Yeah.
That emotion of Rama becomes common to everybody.
Yeah.
So this is why this is not reader-response.
Yes.
See, reader-response, everybody will respond differently.
Yeah.
Same, uniform response.
Yes.
So this is very important, because what Abhinavagupta is saying, and what Bharata himself says at the beginning, and Ananda also says in the context of poetry, it's the rasa, is the artha. You see this whole conflict, Bhāva, Vibhava, Anubhava, etc. And the artha, meaning the meaning. So the rasa is actually, you see the rasa is the emotion, is actually the meaning of what we are seeing. So this is very important. Rasa is the meaning.
Not only
in real life, the emotion is not the meaning. If you make me angry, and then I become angry, I can't say that what you are doing, the meaning is anger. You know, it has nothing, just the effect, cause effect. There's nothing to do with meaning or understanding, you know. Whereas in the theatre, you have to pay attention and you're trying to make sense what is going on, why is Sita behaving in this way, why is Rama. In trying to make sense, and then you are looking, then all your own vasanas and samskaras from your own worldly experience is coming in.
Mm-hmm.
So you are reconstructing the meaning on the stage. It comes to us very easily. So
This meaning is also very joyful. Not
it's
only
a joyful. So even
joyful.
when you are reconstructing the meaning of horror,
Yeah.
bhayanaka or
Yeah.
bibhatsa,
Yeah, it's a joyful.
it's a meaning. So it's enjoyable.
Yeah.
It still has the disgust side little bit to it.
Yeah.
But so this is very important. Rasa and the bhava, the distinction.
Yeah. So quite interestingly, one of the key philosophical idea I think which Bharat hasn't said, which Abhinavagupta highlights, is about like 8 basic emotions that is correspondingly into 8 different rasha, which is like they are in everybody's consciousness. That is the key philosophical idea. So also in the case of vibhava, which is when we see in the chapter 7, that is included for the description of any transitory emotion, even a sattvic bhava. But for Abhinavagupta, vibhava and bhava becomes a very technical things. Like bhava is something, an abstract idea. It can only show through in the anubhava. So these are the world of realm of aesthetics. So would you like to put a little more on the light on the first point you mentioned about the how the semblance of any rasa become haasya by enumerating some example or highlighting a little more on it?
Okay, so let me take Virabhasa. So Abhinavagupta gives various examples. I can't immediately think of all of them.
Yeah.
But for example, Virabhasa, for example, if you look at all the plays, the Vidūṣaka is actually a bit of a cowardly guy.
Yeah.
But sometimes when he sees some birds, or when the hero is in love, and then he sees some birds, they are making love, some pigeons or something, he will take the stick. He has always a crooked stick he will take and he will charge, attack people, or he will try to behave like a hero with the maids, with the dasyas, with the dasis in the play. So that is Virabhasa.
Okay.
You see?
Yeah. Okay.
So, like, if you see Bhayabhasa, let me go outside the theatre, outside the India and go to the West. See mother playing with the child. She will put on some mask or something, and the baby is the clay. Oh, the baby gets scared, start crying, and the mother takes off the thing, covers the face, takes it off. So the baby is laughing, crying, laughing, playing with the baby, you see.
Yeah.
So they're using Bhayanaka.
Yeah.
You see?
All right. I understand. Yeah.
So Sringara, I've already given the example.
Yeah.
So you take Bibhatsa, for example, dirty jokes. Why are the dirty jokes funny? So there is seemingly Sringara. See, dirty jokes are a little bit like pornographic jokes, which people always make.
Yeah.
So there is Bibhatsa and Sringara mixed together.
Yeah.
So the Bibhatsa destroys the Sringara. And the Sringara is also there. The mind is like going back and forth between the two. So people laugh. So that is, yes. So he gives a couple of examples.
Abhinavagupta clearly establishes like one of the famous examples of like Lolat. He says, look, this is what the Lolat theory is more about causation and effect. And another is like, the cause is cause is converted into effect. Another idea is cause is there and it remains there in effect. And then he goes on this multiple condition, and then he talks about that aesthetics is the third category, which is not same as a karya karan bhav, or it's not at the same in the case of Shankuk, it is not the case of vigyapti bhav, but the third realm where is the aesthetics realm. And that is how he used bhav and vibhav and those terminology, and says a new domain. So when you say that all rasa can be understood into Haasya, does it mean that all rasa has essentially to do with epistemological? Because the Haasya-rasa has a nature which is unlike other nature. It is social and epistemological. So does Abhinavagupta mean that when you say the all rasa can be understood as Haasya, does it mean that epistemological nature of rasa should be understood through Haasya or something else?
So I would basically say, because I said that these 4 things about Abhinavagupta, it's a good question. So after thinking a lot about Abhinavagupta, these statements, and then I was also been reading at the same time.
Yeah.
Because to make sense of this, I also started reading many Western thinkers. I was reading Bergson and Freud and Kessler, and especially somebody who influenced me a lot already in Malaysia before I came to, somebody called Gurdjieff. And I came across his theory of laughter, which also was very interesting for me. So basically, let me first put it in a nutshell, what I consider to be the essence of humor. So all the rasas, they have a fixed character, anger, fear. You can identify immediately these rasas, these bhavas, these emotions, because they have a very recognizable character. So in my theory, what I call the bisociation theory of humor, humor is not a single emotion. See, if Abhinavagupta says that all the emotions are, so this is what I'm coming to, the second thing, all the emotions are included in Haasya. The reason why all the emotions can be included in Haasya is because Haasya is not a simple emotion. It is a structure. It is a binary structure.
Okay.
So basically, let me explain because this may seem like puzzling.
Yeah.
The rasas, if you look, Bharata already divides the rasas or the bhavas into two categories.
Yes.
We talked about pradhana and principal and subsidiary, but another thing is pleasant and painful. Sukhatmaka
Dukhatmaka.
and dukkhatmaka.
Yeah.
So Shringara is Sukhatmaka, Veera is Sukhatmaka.
Yeah.
Yes? So Vismaya, Adbhuta is Sukhatmaka.
Yeah.
And then you have Dukkhatmaka, you have painful rasas, anger, Shoka, Bhayanaka, Jugupsa.
Yeah. Karun.
Right?
Yeah.
Painful. So basically, these emotions, if you look at them biologically and from an evolutionary perspective, the emotions, all our life, we are attracted to pleasure. We are attracted to things which we think are good for us. We are attracted to women because we need to reproduce, or the woman is attracted to the man because of reproductive instinct. There's attraction, Sukhatmaka. At the same time, there are dangerous things like tigers and snakes. So we need to have this instinctive fear, repulsion. So the thing is this: any stimulus, vibhava, stimulus in the world, it evokes either a positive or a negative reaction. So positive reaction, we say yes. So a beautiful woman, mind says yes. You see, when she sees the image, she says yes. So when you see a tiger or scorpion, it says no. Automatic, we don't even think yes or no. So the impression, when you get that stimulus, immediately the mind, psychologically, the body itself, not just the mind, the body says yes, no. So all the emotions, when there is an impression on the mind, it's either yes or no. But what happens when a stimulus simultaneously creates yes and no, same time?
Okay.
You look at Ravana expressing his love for Sita, he says yes, Shringa, yes. And immediately no. Same time, okay. Yes and no. So Gurdjieff says, in his understanding of laughter, he says, see, normally we say yes and then we start acting. The girl, we start chasing after the girl. Or if you are trying to win some award, you are then showing heroine, utsaha. Gira rasa is based on utsaha, on energy, on enthusiasm. You go chasing after some goal in life. See? Like that. If it is a bhayanaka, you run away. Yes? Etc. So immediately there is arthakriya karitva, it's called. Purposive action in the world. So all these different karanas or causes, stimuli, result in purposive action. So even if you don't actually start acting in a certain way, mentally the mind is preparing for action. Say, oh, how can I do this? How can I get her? Like that. But when you say yes and no at the same time, the mind cannot digest it. It becomes paralyzed. Yes and no, that's why incongruity. I come down to the notion of incongruity. This is what incongruity really is. So when this happens, there is a kind of paralysis in the whole system of processing this data. And what happens? We start laughing. The nervous system, there's a kind of a convulsion in the thing, and we start laughing. You see? Laughing. So that's when we start laughing. So I'm starting with the basics. So when the mind says yes and no at the same time, then there is a opposition, there is a sharp yes and a sharp no, not some fuzzy yes, no, perplexity, confusion, not like that. Very clear yes, very clear no for opposition. So when this opposition, neither this has the upper hand nor this, then we start laughing. So it's a convulsion. That's a kind of trigger for the body. So this is there's a physical aspect in laughter. So this structure is what is underlying humor. So when Abhinavagupta says, so this is where I am trying to show the coherence. All these four things which Abhinavagupta says make sense only if we assume this psychological structure. So the yes can be any emotion. The yes can be Shringara, Veera, Vismaya, Adbhuta, it can be. Similarly, the no can be Bibhatsa, Jugupsa, Bibhatsa, Bhayanaka, fear, it can be anger. So because of that, any of the emotions on the yes side or the no side can come into this structure. So it's a structure. Okay. But then it's very tied up with laughter and humor and this convulsion, you see, which is also... So this is why any rasa, any emotion can be included in Haasya. This is the reason why also, I'll come to that later in a separate part of the interview. This is why Haasya is so confusing. Some people say humor is the sense of proportion. I can say the opposite. Both will be correct. Both will be correct. For example, I make a racist joke. There is a woman here, I want to insult her. And if I do that, she may take me to court, or she may, everybody. But if I make a joke, in such a way the joke is done, so everybody can laugh. Even those people who don't have this kind of, anti-woman, they're not misogynist, they will also start laughing because the joke is so nicely done. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I understand.
So it's a lack of, can you say it is proportion? It's lack of proportion. In fact, he's trying to get us, he's going to get around this taboo, you see. At the same time, if you say that humor is tied up with a sense of proportion, it will also be true. Because a fanatic is only one-sided. Fanatic, his mind is going on one track. So if you make a joke, you make him see things from the opposite angle. So you introduce a sense of proportion. You stop him in his tracks. So what I'm trying to say is humor can play completely opposite roles. And the reason it can play completely opposite roles is because it is not a simple unitary emotion. It's not like Bhayanaka or any of the other ones. It is a structure. So this is my basic insight into humor and laughter in my thesis. And I explained everything else on this basis.
Thank you, sir. Just to recapture everything, I think Abhinavagupta in Abhinav Bharati comments right when he is describing nature of human traits and 8 basic emotions. He also says that is a man because he feels himself superior to others, therefore the laughter happens. So not only incongruity, Abhinavagupta also talks about superiority.
Yes, he mentions it.
I think we'll pause or maybe take a rest for this session.
Yes.
We'll continue everything in the next session.
Very good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I think we've made a lot of good progress.
Right.